Fun Ideas Productions presents the Fun Ideas Podcast.
You know Dasher, Dancer, and Prancer and Vixen, Comet and Cupid, Donner and Blitzen. But do you recall the most famous reindeer of all?
Hi, this is Mark Arnold, and welcome to Fun Ideas Podcast number 50. This episode is sponsored by the fine folks at Lee's Comics. Headquartered, the book on the monkey's solo career has been turned in and should be out in February or March of 2020. Same with the Warren Kremer book. Crossing my fingers. I'm still working on my own Light Up Your Life travel agency, and the TTV Underdog scrapbook, and the Mad book. Plus, I just turned in an article about Dick Tracy's 90th anniversary for Hogan's Alley magazine, and an article about Harvey Comics giveaways for Craig Yo's upcoming book about comic book giveaways. And I'm still working on an article about Harvey mystery comics of the 1970s for Back Issue magazine. Our guest today is the premier expert on all things RankinBass, the company responsible for a number of fondly remembered Christmas specials, including Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Frosty the Snowman, Santa Claus is Coming to Town, and The Year Without a Santa Claus. They also had a number of theatrical releases and Saturday morning TV series. Our guest has written a number of books about these shows, including The Enchanted World of Rankin-Bass. Here he is, Rick Goldschmidt. Yeah, on the phone today I have Rick Goldschmidt, who is the author of The Enchanted World of Rankin-Bass, one of my favorite books. And I just wanted to know how you, basically tell us about yourself and how you got interested and involved in the world of Rankin-Bass.
Well, it started out in college when my degree was in illustration, and I went to Columbia College, Chicago. And I started talking to Jack Davis and Paul Coker Jr. because I loved their work, and that was the style of art that I was kind of getting into, was humorous illustration. And then I realized that both of them designed all of the Rankin-Bass shows, and it kind of took me back to my childhood, especially Mad Monster Party, which I had remembered seeing on this bizarre local channel in Chicago called Channel 44. They were showing like a lot of public domain and forgotten TV shows and things like that. So it really brought me back, and I was curious, like, whatever happened to Arthur Rankin Jr. and Jules Bass? There was nothing written about them at all. And they really couldn't tell me much about him either, Jack Davis and Paul Coker. So they gave me his number in Bermuda, and I called him up and told Arthur that I wanted to do a book, even though I had no intent for doing a book, period. And he was like, send me 2 chapters. So I went over to a friend's house, and this is before PCs in the home, you know. A friend of mine was a video editor, and he had a primitive computer, and I basically typed up the chapters at his home and then cut and paste them with images that I had collected and sent that to Arthur, and he liked it, and the next thing I knew, he sent me his whole life story on a little micro cassette.
Oh, wow.
And I just went from there, and I started scrounging up everything I could find, you know, at toy shows and movie conventions and things like that, because this was before eBay. This was when you went and got the Toy Shop newspaper, and you went through that and found collectibles, and I was looking for New Adventures of Pinocchio and Tales of the Wizard of Oz, because they heavily merchandise the early Rankin-Bass shows, and I just went from there, and ever since then I've been doing the same thing, you know, scrounging up material, doing interviews and appearances and things like that for my books, and it's been a lot of fun, and it's led to a lot of projects that I thought never would have come in my lifetime.
Right.
So it's been a lot of fun.
So when did that first version of, I have the revised one in front of me, the first version of Enchanted World come out?
That was in November of 1997.
Okay.
And it actually, what happened from that release was it spawned the merchandising that we see everywhere now.
Mm-hmm.
Because up until that point, there was nothing on RankinBass's Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer or Frosty the Snowman, except for a record album that was a giveaway for GE products. And CVS Pharmacies was the first to merchandise, and a company called Stuffins did the beanbag dolls, and they called me up and told me the idea came from my book. That he was on a plane to a Japanese toy fair and saw that there was never any merchandising, and then CVS, I guess Stuffins proposed it to CVS, and they liked it, and they went from there. And I got all the beanbag dolls in advance of them being released week by week, because they wanted my opinion of them and so forth. So it was kind of a cool genesis of merchandise and all this attention to RankinBass. But really, always, and even to this day, what I get the most satisfaction out of, and I know you probably do too with your books, is giving the attention to the creators.
Yeah.
The people that really made these shows last 50 plus years are the ones that put it all together, and that tends to get forgotten about because in today's world, it's all about, the quote-unquote product.
Right, or the characters, yeah.
And these big companies they don't care about the history. They don't really even care about the fans. They just care about the money. Mm-hmm. And that's always a bad thing. And it takes people like us to bring the attention back to the actual creators. And a lot of them are gone now.
Right.
So you really have to speak for them,
Mm-hmm.
I knew Tony Peters, who designed Rudolph. I knew Gene Muller, who was Romeo Muller's brother, who wrote the special. I knew all these people, and they trusted me, and we became friends. And, that relationship is really all that's left of what was on their minds,
Mm-hmm.
And the history of it is, passed on to us. So I think that's the most important thing, is to really give the creators the credit that they deserve.
Right. Is there anybody you tried to reach out to that either A, refused, or just you were not able to get a hold of when you're initially starting the books?
No, everybody was very nice and very agreeable. Now, Jules Bass was always sort of antisocial.
Oh, okay.
And I found that out from everybody. And they would all say, Rick, it's not you, it's him.
Okay.
So he never wanted to participate, really, even though he went through my book, the first release of my book. And Arthur brought him in occasionally and tried to bring him into, various things. But overall, Arthur started the company from scratch. And Arthur really was, the driving force behind the whole thing. And, he made the things happen, and to get him involved was very important because,
right.
whenever he was involved, everybody else wanted to to help out.
Okay.
And
yeah, because
and
I
that was
was
a
always
good
wondering about that with Jules, because he's still around, right? And, he just seems to be standoffish. But if you're saying that's the way he is, well, that's the way he is.
From the beginning, Arthur was the voice of the company and the president. There's a CEO and there's a vice president, and Arthur was the CEO, and I didn't know that. At the beginning, I thought it was an equal partnership, but it was good that I was able to reach out to Arthur, because Jack Davis and Paul Coker only dealt with Arthur.
Oh, okay.
So that's how that happened, and Arthur was the one who paid them.
Right.
And Arthur was the one who hired them. So
okay.
It was, there was a lot of Arthur, I can say that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, because I've seen it, you were able to interview him and things like that, because there's video interviews as bonuses on some of these Rudolph DVDs and things like that.
Right.
And
well, the nice thing was, Arthur participated in, I think it was the 2001 DVD releases. And I always talk, because people always ask me, what are the best releases? And to this day, those are still the best releases. These big companies ruin everything. And I just saw today, somebody sent me that The Little Drummer Boy is coming out on Blu-ray November 17th or something like that. Mm-hmm. But it's not restored or remastered. It's off of a 16 millimeter print. It doesn't say that, but I know that's the fact. It's missing sound effects. It's missing dialogue. It's missing a lot. And rather than them come to me and help them restore it and everything, they would rather just stick it out there and make the buck without any care or attention to what they're actually doing. And they did this last year, too. They initially involved me. They initially said they were going to do these things right, and then they did them wrong. It's like, why? Why are you doing this? Because I'm going to let people know that you're doing this, and why would you do that?
Now, this Little Drummer Boy, is the version that's been out on just regular DVD, is that still a 16 millimeter print? Or?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it's the same print, just thrown onto a Blu-ray. You got it. Okay. All right.
Just ripped to a Blu-ray. And there's no bonus features or nothing. Yeah. And, obviously I have a lot of stuff here that could make up bonus features. And it's a shame. It's terrible what they do with these properties. That's the word I was looking for. They consider them properties, but yet they don't care about them. Right. Look at the Wizard of Oz. Now, the Wizard of Oz is like Rudolph in some ways. There's the Island of Misfit Toys and all these characters people love. And the Wizard of Oz is getting all this attention, 4K restore, all kinds of bonus features, all kinds of great stuff. But Rudolph is put out like garbage continually. Wow. And it's a shame. I have the ending of Rudolph in color from '64. This is the one where the elf is throwing the packages with the credits off the sleigh. Right. Universal, the company that took over the properties, didn't even care that I have that. Didn't want to restore it, didn't want to add it as a bonus, didn't want to do nothing. And there's a lot of people, bad people involved, that claim they own the rights of these things when they don't. Yeah. The Romeo Muller estate and the Tony Peters estate is the same thing as the Stan Lee estate and the Jack Kirby estate when it comes to Marvel and Disney. So there's going to be some changes at some point, but I can't say when that'll be.
Well, let me ask you about ownership a little bit, because I know you talk about it in the book, but I just need a little clarification, and it's been a while since I've read it. I don't have it backwards and forwards.
Sure.
First of two questions, what is the difference between Videocraft and RankinBass?
Well, Videocraft started out in the 50s, and primarily what it was commercials, kind of like how Jim Henson started out, Wilkins and Wilkins and all of that. RankinBass were doing short commercials for products. Pine Wax was one of them. I have some pictures from that in the Arthur Rankin scrapbook. And the Arthur Rankin scrapbook kind of goes into the genesis of Videocraft into RankinBass Productions. So they kind of transitioned over from Videocraft to Rankin Productions, but it was slow.
Okay.
Because they still had used the name Videocraft, everything through the 60s.
Right.
Even though they were known as RankinBass Productions. So I think it was sort of a slow transition out of advertising and into pictures and television.
Mm-hmm.
And, they wanted to be recognized for their names rather than Videocraft. And a lot of people don't know that the shows were all financed by General Electric.
Mm-hmm.
They started a company after Rudolph called Tomorrow Entertainment, and you'll see that in the credits of all the RankinBass shows. But they didn't take as big of a credit as RankinBass did, with the TV logo at the end and so forth. But they were financing everything up till 1974. So that's why RankinBass and Arthur and Jules didn't actually own the shows.
Okay.
They were all financed by GE. But it really gave them free reign to come up with on the creative side and not have to worry about finances for a long time. So that was a good thing.
Well, that actually answers my other question, I guess, because the other one was, why does... Well, now it's NBC Universal own part of the RankinBass stuff, and Warner's owns the other part. But that makes sense, as GE actually owned it, and they sold the stuff they owned through '74 to Classic Media. Was that first, or is it Broadway or something like that? Or
it was Broadway Video and Lorne Michaels from Saturday Night Live, and I think the reason that happened was because they did the Coneheads in the 80s. Right. And I think Lorne Michaels learned that GE had these shows and was getting ready to get rid of them, So he bought them, and then they started out kind of rinky-dink. When they put out the videos on Broadway, they were really cheap releases and really bad prints and so forth. And then Classic Media came out of Golden Books.
Yeah.
And Golden Books actually did a good job with them. They were the ones that got Arthur in to do the introductions and put a few bonus features on and so forth. And they were always in contact with me and sending me all the RankinBass shows they had in their vaults. Mm-hmm. And I liked them, and so did Arthur. And then Classic Media came in and took RankinBass off the DVDs, the name. And I was at Arthur's apartment in New York when he got copies of those, and he called them up and told them, take my introductions off too.
Yeah.
That was all a contractual thing where he did them for them putting the name on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So ever since then, it's been all downhill with
Yeah.
DVDs and Blu-rays. You know, it's sad, but
I have to say it's the same thing, and I've done Harvey stuff, and they went through the same ownerships, and Total Television with Underdog, they've gone through the same ownerships, and people tell me, why don't they do this? Why don't they do that? And it's like, I don't know, it's all the big NBC Universal conglomerate now, and I don't know what they do. So, I used to have contacts too, so it's like...
Yeah. Yeah, it's sad. It's, you and I know what fans want to see.
Right.
That's what we know. We get emails, people get our books, they understand, it's a labor of love. They want to see all the good stuff, all the rare stuff. But these companies, they don't really care.
Yeah.
They don't care what people want to see. They just want to make money.
Right.
And that's it. That's why things like Willie McBean and His Magic Machine has not come out on DVD. Any of the rare RankinBass shows aren't going to see a Blu-ray and DVD release because they're not going to make money in their eyes.
Right.
So, I mean, it's really sad, but...
well, some of them that haven't seen release, I'm kind of curious about. I mean, it's like... I get it that there's no real holiday connection with, like, the Ballad of Smokey the Bear, but you still got some name recognition with James Cagney, so it's like... And you could easily say, from the makers of Rudolph and Frosty and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Do you have any insight about that? Because that's the same library that NBC Universal owns. Is there anything holding that up, or music rights, as it usually is?
It could be, with that particular one, it could be the fact that the government owns Smokey the Bear.
Oh, okay.
And there were some hoops Arthur had to jump through initially to even do that. He had to go to the president, Lyndon Johnson, and get a letter so that James Cagney would do it.
Right.
Because he made him jump through hoops. But there's some legal things in regards to characters nowadays, and a lot of times that's why things aren't done, because they're afraid, even to use pictures sometimes. If they don't get all the rights, or the people that are in the pictures to sign off on them, they won't use them. And I mean, it goes through ridiculous steps to get things done now, whereas back in the day when RankinBass actually made these shows, it was just on a handshake a lot of times.
Right.
And the contracts were only 2 pages long. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times the contracts, because I have a lot of them, they don't even mention merchandising at all. So that's why I knew Earl Hagen, who wrote the Andy Griffith theme song and so many others, Dick Van Dyke and that girl and all of them.
Right.
And he signed a contract in the 70s or 80s that had nothing to do with streaming, DVDs, Blu-rays, and all that. Yeah. So that's why his estate is suing right now.
I see.
And pretty much everybody could do that.
Right.
Because the contract they signed had nothing to do with, streaming and DVD releases and so forth. So it's amazing how things have changed.
Right. It is kind of amazing, though, what you said about the toys. I mean, when I was a kid and they'd replay Rudolph year after year after year after year, and they still do, I would have killed for anything with Rudolph on it back then. We're talking early 70s, and it's like, now it's like things seem to come out every week, which is great, but I'm like, I don't care as much anymore. I'm like,
I know. It's overkill too. And for a long time there was generic Rudolph products,
right,
through the 40s, 50s, 60s. And that's all owned by Robert L. May's family. Mm-hmm. And Johnny Marks, his brother-in-law, wrote the song Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Mm-hmm. And what those families own is the generic Rudolph character, not the Romeo Muller, Hermie the dentist, the Bumble, Yukon Cornelius. Those were all created by the Romeo Muller and Tony Peters, and that's the point I'm trying to get across with my history and writings and so forth, is, that the wrong families are gaining money for the wrong reasons.
Wow.
It's sort of a charade right now, and I don't like it because I've been seeing all this merchandise everywhere and seeing that horrible Broadway musical thing traveling around the country, and they do a puppet show in Atlanta, which I was just in August. I was at Dragon Con, and I did 5 panels, and actually the puppet people were in my panels, and I explained to them, that licensing is not all legal. Because you're using the Romeo Muller story and characters,
right?
And he's not even listed in the program as the writer.
Yeah.
So it's, if I wasn't around catching these things, they would get away with murder, and they have been getting away with murder. But that may change.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was. I mean, I knew the history, but I didn't know that there was so much, ownership issues, as it were. So,
yeah, definitely, and it's especially with Rudolph, and that's the big one.
Yeah,
that's the big special that breaks in millions of dollars in ad revenue probably when it shows on CBS. Now they're going to show it on Freeform too.
Right.
They never did that before. Mm-hmm. So who knows how much that's bringing in, and who knows how much the merchandise is bringing in. Mm-hmm. Menards had a blow mold this year that I picked up for my table. Mm-hmm. And, I look at the copyright, it's the wrong stuff on the bottom. But, you see this stuff all over the place. A lot of it looks like junk, too. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that may be why you're not so much into it anymore at this age, because if it was cool stuff, they made some cool things right after my book came out, a castle and a big Charlie in the Box and all these cool things, but the merchandise has kind of gone downhill too, like the Blu-rays and DVDs. Right.
Yeah, I'm happy I got the earlier editions. Like I have the Golden Books edition, and then I do have a later edition, just because. And I did get the Blu-ray last year, which does have some new stuff on it, but a lot of it, I admit, is kind of substandard, to put it politely. And it's like, wow, with the Blu-ray, they had so much opportunity to put even more stuff, and it's like, because I know you also have that Rudolph book that specifically talks about Rudolph all the way through, and which is a great book too. What was I going to ask about Rudolph? You said you had the color footage, but I think at the time the Rudolph book came out, you said only the black and white footage existed. So how did you track it down to get the color?
Well, my friend found it. He found a network print, and it needs to be color corrected and transferred. Yeah. So he's been kind of hanging on to that for an opportunity to do it right. Yeah. And invest a good amount of money into the restoral of it rather than just transfer it, and he doesn't really want to put it out. Right. So we were going to put it in our RankinBass documentary when we do it. Yeah. But I need to find someone who can actually do a good job on that.
On color correction?
Because I've talked to several people about it, and they haven't really followed through the way that they should. Yeah. Yeah. So eventually someone's going to want to do it and do it right, but...
Right. We will be back after this message.
Hi, I'm George Takei. You know me as Helmsman Sulu on Star Trek. When I'm not busy going Warp Factor 8, I like to beam down to Lee's Comics in Mountain View and spend a lazy afternoon reading comics classics from Marvel to DC, from Dark Horse to Fantagraphics, and everything in between. So please, spend some time here at Lee's Comics and spend your hard-earned cash.
The Fun Ideas podcast is made possible by listeners like you and from Lee's Comics of California, selling you what your mother threw out since 1982, online at leescomics.com. And now back to the Fun Ideas podcast. Is there any other, lost things that you know about other than unreleased stuff? I mean, example, the Edgar Bergen Charlie McCarthy show, was that actually shot or is it just figures?
That was shot.
All the way through? It was like a full show?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've been trying to locate that. I reached out to Candace Bergen a long time ago, but I didn't know about all the relationship issues that she had with the family and so forth. So I don't know who actually has a copy of that or can release it or knows anything about it. It's probably in storage right now. But I did find, and it'll be in my new Frosty book, I did find the whereabouts of Mortimer Snurd, the animagic puppet.
Oh, wow.
So I got some pictures of that from the museum that's housed that, and I'm putting it in my Frosty book. But
cool.
Hopefully that'll turn up one day. Mm-hmm. And I know it was early on in the RankinBass history. It probably, from the pictures I have, I put it around 65, 66.
Right.
And that was shortly after Rudolph aired for the first time, and I think Edgar saw that and loved it and wanted the same thing done with Charlie. And Arthur, when he came over to my home, he remembered the story wrong. and I have it on videotape. He thought that what happened was they shot the pilot and Edgar got sick and passed away. But we know he didn't pass away until after he did the Muppet movie in the 70s. And
right. Yeah, he did a lot of stuff after the 60s. He was in the Walton's pilot movie and things like that. So, yeah, he was an actor throughout the 70s, yeah.
Well, maybe what happened was maybe he did get ill for a while, and then he didn't want to do it anymore for whatever reason, or he wasn't happy with it, or whatever. But Arthur couldn't remember exactly why it didn't happen, you know.
Now, is that supposed to be
so cool?
Was that supposed to be a series or just a one-shot special?
I think it was going to be a series.
Oh, okay.
And he also said they made the mistake of they went out to Beverly Hills and stayed at the Beverly Hills Hotel, him and Jules, and they came up with the concept and wrote the special in a short amount of time. And he said they should have taken their time and stayed there for a long time because that's what they thought they were going to do. So maybe they rushed it too much and it didn't turn out as well as they had hoped. I don't know.
Right.
You have to piece these stories together from what little they remember.
Right.
You know?
And, of course, that's way far back in the 60s, early 60s, so, yeah, I get it.
Right. and when I went to Arthur's home in Bermuda and went through the museum that I helped open a little exhibit there, I saw things like an Amos and Andy special they were going to do.
Oh, wow.
There was a script there and artwork by Paul Coker and, you know, all the work they did with Shirley Temple. And, you know, then I started to realize, you know, there were a lot of projects they started that never got made. And I'm sure they can't remember everything. They were always on to the next thing. They
Right.
did an Arnold Schwarzenegger thing.
Wow.
Because he was a friend of Arthur's in Bermuda.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw like a cell of, he was involved with the fitness program when Reagan was in office, I think, and they were going to do some kind of a Saturday morning thing, I think, with him. And, I mean, it just went on and on and on, and they really didn't care about the past, Arthur and Jules. They cared about the next project,
Right.
what they were going to do. So I think a lot of the history side of things got lost, and they did throw stuff away.
Yeah. No.
I know that for a fact.
Well, I know that story from talking to the Harvey and Total Television too. So I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
just have to move on and just say, yeah. I don't know if you had any of the creators say this. Well, we didn't think it was going to be worth anything, and you just hit your head and go, no.
Right. Right, exactly. And I don't know. A lot of the puppets, I still get asked about animatic figures all the time. That's fascinating to most people, like what happened to them. And most of them stayed in Japan.
Okay.
Most of them did. They only had like a handful that they would display in the office. Some of them were at NBC for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And the stories that float around about Rudolph and Santa, a lot of that was sensationalized from what we talked about. The secretary had them, and most of them got wrecked, and they threw them away, and Rudolph and Santa are the only two to survive. But I know of where 3 Santas are now, and couple Rudolphs, and there's a bunch of puppets in Japan, and they don't talk about that.
Right.
My books talk about it, but not in those articles that float around at Christmas time every year.
Right. How many figures did they make of each? You're saying like 2 and 3 Santas and stuff like that?
Yeah, well, for Rudolph it was different because they wanted to set a display up at the NBC building in New York. So they had a whole set of figures that were just used for publicity. And I believe you see them pictured on the record album cover in 45 sleeve of Sam and Rudolph, and in the publicity photos and things.
Yes.
That those were made just for display.
Oh, I
some
see.
of them. And then, usually they would use 2 puppets so that they could film scenes simultaneously. And, the puppets do tend to wear out, too, as they're animating.
Right.
But a lot of times they only used 1, because I used to own a few from the first Christmas, and Octavia was one of them. She was a little girl who was Lucas's friend, and in one scene she was wearing one set of clothes, and in the last scene she's wearing, she's in the Christmas pageant as Mary, and both sets of clothes were on my puppet.
Wow.
So, like, underneath the Mary outfit is her regular outfit, so they only had 1 of her. And I actually found the girl who did the voice, Hillary Momberger, who was the voice of Sally in A Charlie Brown Thanksgiving. So I wanted to show her the puppet when I was out at the Shag store in Hollywood, but she couldn't make it to the event. But those are funny kinds of things you learn as you go along and do this kind of thing.
Right.
It's fun to investigate all of that,
Right. Since you've owned some of them and seen them, of course, for those who haven't seen them in person, how big are most of the puppets?
Well, they can range from about 8 inches to about 20 inches. You know, the Father Time was very large. And when I watch Rudolph Shiny New Year, I look for that, you know, like how large he is. He's almost as big. He's bigger than Santa and Rudolph, but Santa's pretty big too, you know. They're pretty large size puppets. They're not tiny little figures like some of the action figures that we buy, you know. They're bigger than that. So,
how about the Bumble? Did you see the Bumble ever?
No, but I read, and it's in my... He was about 22 inches tall. So, in the case of his scenes, when he's in the scene with the other characters, there's miniatures of the puppets made.
Oh, okay.
Too. So sometimes you have to look for that, because a lot of times he's in a scene by himself, or and also that's another thing about Sam, how they integrated him into the special was he was in scenes with the other puppets, you know, except when he was outside the window and you could see them decorating the tree inside.
Right.
Other than that, he's all by himself, so he probably was at it last, you know, and that's how they got their lives last. So I always look for these things because it's interesting to see, like, how it was put together and you know, how the characters interact too.
Right.
And now I look, because I've seen the puppets in person, and I know the mouths and the eyes were paper that were drawn on. Some of the expressions that they make, especially in Santa Claus is Coming to Town, where you see Chris's teeth, and when he makes, like, you better not pout.
Right.
You can really see, like, the cut paper.
Okay.
And the different techniques that they use to create those effects.
So that's how they did that, was with paper. It wasn't like, you know, the old Puppetoons, the George Powell Puppetoons, where they had a completely different head, or did they do that?
Not so much.
Okay.
With the RankinBass puppets, they changed out the eyes and the mouths and all of that, but there's a similarity between the two for sure.
Right.
And the George Powell stuff, primarily from what I've learned, was done by Wah Ming Chang, who also did, in Chicago, we have on television every year, Hard Rock Coco and Joe and Susie Snowflake, and his company did those.
Oh.
He started his own company called Centaur, and they did those two stop-motion shorts. So you can definitely see that Wah Ming Chang was behind a lot of the George Powell stuff. And he had a very similar style to the RankinBass work. So I don't know if he knew the animators from RankinBass, but he may have.
Right. And on these figures, how durable are they? I mean, they might be less durable now, 30, 40 years on, but back when they're made, were they made to take a little bit of a beating because they're moving them around so much?
Yeah, I think so. And really, the only things that happen to the ones that I've seen are flecks of paint will chip off from the nose or whatever. The hands, they have wires inside the fingers, and those held together pretty good. You could still animate them. The Smokey the Bear puppet had a lot of wear and tear to him, where the guy who originally owned them, he was showing me all the movements. I was like, holy cow, like he's just, moving everything around, the feet and the hands and the arms, and I thought, man, this guy knows his stuff, but you don't want to be doing that with something that's like 50 years old.
Right.
and he had some sort of a deflated stomach.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was some kind of a balloon inside that popped or something, and the stomach was kind of sunken in. Screen Novelties owns him now in Hollywood, and they're going to restore everything. So I'm hoping they'll, restore it and let me know and show me pictures of it and everything. I told them about a few tree elves from Marco that I could have bought them. They weren't that expensive, but I didn't want to buy them because they had so much damage to them. And I knew Screen Novelties could restore them.
Yeah.
So I told them about it, and they bought them, and they're going to restore them.
Oh, cool.
That's what I care about. I care about, that these things survive.
Right.
And that they can be restored properly. I don't care about actually owning them. Like, I don't need them on my refrigerator sitting up there getting dust.
Right.
And even to bring them to places, it's difficult because you have to take good care of them, and you have to watch them, and so I'd rather not own them, actually.
Pretty awesome responsibility. I got the only Rudolph in the world. Now, I know you said there's multiple ones, but still. What made the Rankin and Bass choose to do some of the specials and some of the TV shows with the figures in the Animagic format, or to do it in flat animation? Why did they go back and forth? And what dictated what they would do? Like Frosty, for example, is flat animation. Was it money or something else?
Good question. No, it's a variety of reasons. It was money in a way, and it was the look in another way. Arthur always said with Frosty, he wanted it to look like a Christmas card. And Paul Coker Jr. was actually doing Christmas cards for Hallmark for a long time, and he continued to do that even till recently.
Yeah.
Most of his cards were in the foreign market, but that lettering style that was used for everything in Frosty, that was the lettering style he used on the Christmas cards.
Right.
and his look, you gotta say, when you look at RankinBass's cell work, which is very different than Total Television and the shows that you've written books about, it had a style to it that, like, as soon as you saw it, you knew it was RankinBass.
Yeah.
It wasn't Disney style. They weren't, like, copying anybody. They were kind of using the Paul Coker look and running with it.
Yeah. That's what I thought, too. Even before I read Mad or anything like that, I said, these all have kind of the same look, and it was either the drawings or the music that led me to believe. I didn't even know necessarily the name Rankin Bass early on, but later on I figured it out. Oh, this is this studio, and this is what they do,
and then they went into doing the Festival of Family Classics, which I saw everywhere as a kid. I saw them on Channel 9 during Fraser Thomas's Family Classics show, and then teachers at school would show them, like for whatever holiday it was or whatever they were teaching. So, I mean, that Paul Coker look was a lot of the reason that they switched over to cell for some things, and then it was financial too. What they did was they they hired a variety of studios. It wasn't, RankinBass didn't house their own animation studio in New York. It was Mushi and Toei,
Yeah.
and the puppet studio in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And they would just kind of, before this was ever done, like they do now, source out to a foreign company for financial reasons. But to see that there's a difference between what RankinBass did and what companies do now. It's not strictly financial with RankinBass because Arthur loved the Japanese culture.
Mm.
And he spent a lot of time there. And in fact, he went back there when the tsunami came in, I don't know, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, whenever that was.
Mm-hmm.
And he reunited at a party with a lot of the animators.
Mm.
And he said it was a love fest. That they loved working on the shows, and he loved working with them. And he had a guy that he was very close to named Masaki Izuka. And I met him at Arthur's Memorial in Bermuda, and I met him in New York, too, when Arthur was honored in 2003. And he basically took Masaki as another son.
Mm-hmm.
And his two sons didn't really want to work in the business in entertainment. But Masaki became this young producer who worked on a lot of the later RankinBass shows, and then eventually he did the New Adventures of Johnny Quest and a few other things, with his animation studio. So Arthur loved the culture and the people, and he oversaw the animation work done at Toei and Mushi and at the puppet studio. So it was different in the way that they took it there. It wasn't just for financial reasons.
Okay.
They also knew they could do the best job.
Right. Now, were all the shows done overseas, or was there anything done in the U.S. or in North America?
Well, they were all animated there, but the creative part of it, a lot of it was done in the States because, it had to be storyboarded, and Paul Coker had to design them, and Jack Davis too, and the music, Maury Laws, he recorded it in England, but he lived in New York primarily, so all of the concept work was done in the States, and then the animation was done in Japan, and then some of it was done in Canada too.
Oh, okay.
The voice actors were in Canada for a lot of the early stuff.
Right.
And then they did some of the animation for Tales of the Wizard of Oz at Crawley Studios in Canada, and for Return to Oz too.
Okay.
So they were that's why they were called Videocraft International.
Got it. Okay.
They were an international company.
Mm-hmm. Now, what was I going to ask? Lost my train of thought here. Well, I'll just kind of go through a few specials and things like that. Like in the early 70s, it seemed like RankinBass, well, they did have a couple 60s shows, but they seemed like one of the contenders that they did a lot of Saturday morning shows along with Hanna-Barbera and Filmation and DePatie Freeling. Was that lucrative for them, or did I guess I know the answer, but I mean, it's like obviously Hanna-Barbera was number one. Did they try to compete with them excessively, or just say we'd like to do this too, or what was going on in the early 70s over there?
Well, I got to meet Bill and Joe, and we talked about RankinBass, and they were aware of them, but they weren't really competitive with them, you know, which I found interesting. And whenever I brought them up with RankinBass, it was the same thing. They didn't really have any feelings about them one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
I think the early 70s stuff came from a relationship they had with Michael Eisner, who was in charge of children's television programming for ABC. Primarily, most of their Saturday morning work was for ABC. The only one that was on a different network, I think, was the Tomfoolery Show, which was on NBC. But they had this relationship with ABC, probably from Santa Claus is Coming to Town and Here Comes Peter Cottontail, and then The Emperor's New Clothes, that Eisner probably said, you know, could you do something with the Jackson 5, or could you do something with the Osmonds, or whatever, and that just one thing led to another, and it continued for a while to be an ABC thing. And I'm sure they made enough money from it to do what they really wanted to do, which was to get feature films made, again for ABC on the Friday night movie. You know, they did a series of those, the Bermuda Debts and the Ivory Eight and Sins of Dorian Gray. That's what Arthur really wanted to do, was make movies that were going to be like, eventually be the Gone with the Wind Oscar contenders, but he never quite made it there, you know, and he was very fond of those movies, and King Kong Escapes, and some of the other things they did, but
no Oscar nod for King Kong Escapes.
No, but looking back, you know, that was the thing. And when he got the revised edition of my book, the 15th anniversary edition, he said tears came to his eyes. You know, like, he was really touched by it, because when you look back at the body of work and you see everything they did, which was a lot, and most of it was successful too, he was okay with that he would be remembered for Rudolph and Frosty, you know.
Yeah.
But for a long time, I don't think he wanted to quit, because he wanted to get, you know, that type film made.
Right.
And that's what led to doing The King and I, which came out after my book, my first book. And still trying to get specials on the air. They did Santa Baby, and
okay.
he was always trying to do stuff.
Okay, that was one of my questions too, because I have your first edition, and then I have your revised edition. There's a lot more in it, and it has those later specials. But I didn't even know when those aired originally that it was even part of RankinBass. I just thought it was classic media trying to cash in a buck or something like that. I didn't know what it was.
No.
And then you have it in the book, and I go, wow, that's real RankinBass stuff? I thought they were gone. I thought they ended in the 80s sometime, but...
well, their partnership ended in the 80s.
Okay.
Arthur and Jules. And then Peter Battalion stepped in to Jules' place. And while I was doing my book, you know, Peter and Arthur were still in the office, and they were still trying to get stuff made. And that's when, you probably, I don't know if it's in my 15th anniversary or my 20th anniversary, but in one of them, that's why I stepped in after I did my Rudolph book, and I said, what they really should be doing is another Christmas special with a quality host like Andy Williams. So I got a hold of Andy Williams, and he said sure, he would do it. And I got Paul Coker to do the designs, and I wrote a treatment of it, and I said, hell, Donny Osmond was ecstatic when I called him about RankinBass and said, if it wasn't for RankinBass, the Osmonds wouldn't have been nearly as successful as they were.
Wow.
That was his opinion.
I think he was correct.
And they were both in Branson, Andy Williams and the Osmonds, and Andy Williams was the one that made the Osmonds famous in the first place.
Right.
So I thought, wouldn't that be great if we could do an Andy Williams Christmas special and have the Osmonds in it, where they could look like they did in the 70s, do their voices, and, you know, everyone could look young again, and this could be like the premier RankinBass comeback, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Arthur kind of thought that, you know, he thought Andy Williams was great from Moon River and all that, but he thought people had forgotten about him.
Mm.
And Peter basically took my proposal and showed it to networks and tried to see if there was any interest in going retro. Mm-hmm. But apparently there wasn't, and it never happened. But I would have loved to have seen that happen.
Yeah.
But Santa Baby and The King and I weren't as good because it had to go through a whole bunch of processes and focus groups and other people involved. And, you know, that's not how RankinBass functioned.
Right.
It was always like, go to the network, tell them what you're going to do. They give you the money to do it, and you have to deliver it by a certain date. That was it. You know, it was all self-contained. You know, Maury Laws and Romeo Muller and all that. And that's, you know, not the way it works today. And that's why stuff that comes out today is out for a weekend and forgotten about in a few months. It's kind of weird, but, you know, you got to give RankinBass a lot of credit for what they did, because not only were they making money, but they were making things with heart and warmth and quality and stuff that keeps it going for 50 years.
Right.
Nobody can copy that, you know? Mm-hmm. They try, and, you know, all the stuff you see today, it doesn't even compare with what they did.
Right.
You know?
I think that's across the board. I mean, everybody tries, but, you know, there's too many committees, too many vice presidents, too many producers, where you know, it used to be the creators doing it.
Exactly.
I do have a number of questions based on a lot of things you said, so I'll just kind of rattle them off.
Sure.
Did Jack Davis and Paul Coker ever do their own storyboarding, or did they just do character designs?
Jack Davis started doing storyboarding on the King Kong show, but his storyboards were too large, and he didn't like doing it, so he stopped. Okay. And that's why other people moved in. There's another name in the credits under his. Okay. Paul Coker never storyboarded. He always did painterly model sheets, actually. A lot of his model sheets turned up. In fact, a guy brought me 4 of his original model sheets at Dragon Con. And he was like, I bought these at a toy store for like $50 a piece or something. And these things were gorgeous. I took a picture of Eon the Terrible and Happy the Baby New Year. And then he had a couple from The Stingiest Man in Town that I've seen before. Yeah. But these things were absolutely gorgeous. And same with Jack Davis's work for RankinBass. I have one of his Coneheads originals, and just gorgeous stuff. You know, Arthur was an artist, so he was an art director at ABC. So he recognized talent like right off the bat. And in fact, when he came to visit me, that's all we talked about was Jack Davis and Paul Coker's work and how it translated to animation and this and that. So we shared that love of art that it's kind of hard to describe. You either have to have an eye, you don't have an eye for it, you know? And he did. He hired Hirschfeld for the Daydreamer.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
So, I mean, and Frazetta for Mad Monster Party.
Yeah. Did you ever talk to them? Did you ever talk to them, or were they gone?
I talked to Frazetta's wife, Ellie.
Okay.
And Hirschfeld, no, because I think he had already passed away by then.
Okay.
I always followed his work, though.
Okay. Another person I was just curious about, since we're talking about Davis, is Harvey Kurtzman, who created Mad, basically. He wrote the Mad Monster Party. Did you ever get a chance to speak with him, or is he gone before you started doing research?
I talked to him. By the time I talked to him, his Parkinson's had progressed so much that he wasn't really able to say much. And then I went to some interviews. I have some interviews with him. One was taped with him and Jack at San Diego Comic-Con. And he always, he said that he got paid, like $4,000 or $5,000 or whatever, and he didn't really care about the movie, and he didn't really think it was anything great. And I found out from the actual writer, Len Korobkin, that he didn't really write all that much, Harvey Kurtzman. He only went through the script and then added some funny lines. And he added Burb Fitzels or whatever that word that they call all the drugs in the drugstore. Came out, Weibelfetzers.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It came out of Mad Magazine. And the title was changed several times. It was called Mad Monster Rally, Monster Convention. It was called a whole bunch of things for a long time. And I think he changed the title with that question mark.
Yeah. Because
he had that falling out with Mad by that time, and that was kind of a shot at them, I think.
Right. You did a book about that one too, right?
Right.
I don't have that one. I need to get that one. Okay. But does it talk about everything in there that we're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've even had. This is kind of funny. Arthur one time said, "Hey Rick, Jules tells me that you're wrong about Frazetta, and you're wrong about, the way that all happened with the artwork and this and that. But I knew I was right, because I did a lot of research on that. And what happened with Frazetta was his artwork was used without his permission.
Yeah.
And he threw a fit.
Yeah.
And he was a big guy back then. He was kind of like Clint Eastwood, where he would kick your ass if you did something wrong to him.
Yeah.
So he went after them, but it wasn't RankinBass that made that decision, because Arthur was a Jack Davis fan, and he wanted to use the Jack Davis art. It was Josephine Levine that changed the art to Frazetta's roughs. And then Frazetta eventually got paid, but they didn't even use his finished art, which he had done, because I don't even think he turned it in. And he put that in, and it's in my book too, a colored finish version. So it's kind of interesting. Even when I find out the truth, some of the people think it's wrong.
I'm used to that.
Yeah.
Was that was Mad Monster Party their most successful theatrical film, or is it just the most cult classic now?
It's a cult classic, and people love it, but it was never financially a big hit.
Okay.
The one that was The Last Unicorn.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
The Last Unicorn, Siskel and Ebert gave it a thumbs up. I remember seeing that. Mm-hmm. And that had a huge cast of great people, just like a lot of their other films did. But critically and financially, I think that was probably their biggest success feature-wise. Mm-hmm. You know, they made a shiny Rudolph and Frosty's Christmas in July as a feature film. Mm-hmm. And they put it out in the summer. Right. And it didn't do well at all. And by the winter, they had it on ABC as a television special.
Yeah, I never knew that. Yeah, I never knew that was a theatrical one until your book came out. I was like, oh, they just made a longer special, you know.
Yeah, and that one's kind of hard to warm up to. I watched it several times, and I guess there's a better version of it now on streaming. It's an HD version. Uh-huh. And there's some funny parts in it with that Scratcher reindeer with Alan Suze doing his voice. Yeah. But overall, it doesn't have the same charm that the earlier specials have, which is odd because they got a lot of the same talent. Yeah. It just didn't click for some reason.
I just think it has to do with length, you know. Like if they cut it back to an hour special, it'd probably be better.
Yeah, you're probably right. And same with Mad Monster Party was a little too long. Mm-hmm. Arthur had a different cut of that he liked better. So
now, I guess now Arthur Rankin is passed, so there's no other projects on the books that would be an official RankinBass type project, right? It would be just like those ones that we've seen, you know, there's like sequels to like the Miser Brothers and things like that. Are you involved in any of those things, or is that considered canon? Okay.
No, I don't know how you feel about it, but
I don't like them. I'll just be
I don't like when they remake everything either. Yeah. You know, a lot of people say, well, the only thing good about it is it brings attention back to the original. Right. But I'd rather they don't do it at all because it's so bad. Yeah. Like remaking this stuff and. You know, they've been talking about doing a Mad Monster Party movie for the longest time. Mm-hmm. They had the writers of Analyze This working on it, and I met some of the producers over the years, and, you know, it's like, how could you remake that? It's what makes it good is the puppets. Right. And CGI doesn't have the same feel at all. Right. In fact, it's been so homogenized now, everything looks the same. I don't even know if you can tell studios apart anymore. Yeah. So, I mean, there's no originality in Hollywood anymore, and that's sad.
Yeah. I think the most original...
what I tell people...
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I do these panels a lot now. So you have to kind of think things out. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I tell everybody is this. The difference between RankinBass and why it's lasted for 50 years and the difference between today's animation is, think about it. What Arthur Rankin was doing was hiring people that were seasoned veterans. Right. Jack Davis had worked in magazines and Mad and all that stuff for 30 years or 20 years by that time. Right. Same with Paul Coker. Maury Laws did all kinds of records for Time Life, and he worked in orchestras and was on television, all this stuff. What they do today is they're hiring college kids out of college for $10 an hour that say, "Oh, Disney's my dream job,"
Yeah.
Or whatever. These people have no experience, no talent. Well, some talent, but not like these guys. So you're looking at two completely different things, talent, seasoned veterans, and then students out of college.
Right.
I mean, that's the reason that things are so bad now is, no seasoned people are going to hang around.
Yeah. The only thing I see now that is kind of reminiscent of RankinBass, and I don't think it was necessarily their intention, and it's not U.S., is the Aardman studio who does the Wallace and Gromit and those type of films. And what's your opinion of those? I mean,
I'm not really familiar with them, to be honest, to have an opinion.
Okay.
I've never really watched them too much. I don't care for the character design. I think that's what what draws me in is if I like the character design, I'll want to watch it. But I haven't seen anything that I like as far as character design.
Well, it is true. Their stuff tends to have these little beady marble eyes and big teeth and things like that. That's their kind of style.
Right.
So I guess if that doesn't appeal to you, I get it. But I think story-wise and concept-wise, they're probably the closest that could come to the Animagic thing that's presently done. But,
they say Leica is too, but all of their films I haven't had any interest in either.
Right.
I don't know what it is. It's that character design that has to grab me. Yeah.
I mean, I've seen stuff like Coraline and stuff like that, and it's okay. And but I get it. The character design. RankinBass did have this very appealing design style. That
I did like Nightmare Before Christmas.
Yeah.
That I really got into, and I did like the early Pixar stuff.
Yeah.
I thought they were on the right track until Disney took them over.
Yeah.
So those two things, were my favorite things of anything close to RankinBass Productions. But
I
don't know. I'm like at a loss for today's entertainment. It's like,
well, it all gets so
I don't get it.
It's all the same. It seems like it's like
even the Addams Family, which came out this year.
Yeah,
I was hearing for years that it was going to be stop motion and it was going to be done by Tim Burton and it was going to look exactly like the Charles Addams script. And I think they tried to make it look like the Charles Addams stuff, but they went for the cheap jokes and stuff. Because what I saw in the trailer was not what Charles Adams would do humor-wise.
Right. I'll probably eventually see it, but I haven't seen it yet, so out of curiosity. But it was a little bit of a letdown of what it looked like just from the previews.
Right.
Yeah, so I agree with you there. You mentioned somewhere along the line, this is total non-sequitur segue or whatever, but you were talking about Donny Osmond and Andy Williams and everything. I understand from your book is that Donny Osmond, or the Osmond family, owns that Osmond's show. And if he has such reverence for the RankinBass show, why doesn't he ever issue that as onto video?
He did. He put a DVD out for years that was available at the Osmond Theater. And I think it had 4 episodes on it or something like that. And I think he does own the show or part of the show. But I don't know if he has all the masters of it.
Okay.
So I don't know where that stands. And I don't think the masters were at Golden Books and classic media and so forth, because they were sending me what they had, and they never came across that.
Yeah.
But then they never sent me Jackson 5, and then they put that out on DVD and Blu-ray too.
Right.
So I don't know. It's hard to call on that one, but Donnie was pretty adamant about that he owns it, so
Yeah.
I'm sure he does.
Yeah. That's kind of interesting. Yeah, it's just kind of weird, but I had the same struggles you did. It's like when I worked on the Underdog DVD set and the Casper set and the Tennessee Tuxedo set, it was like almost impossible to find everything. I mean, we somehow managed to do it, and I don't know if you had this issue with the RankinBass stuff. They had tons of stuff at Classic Media that they had the visual for, but they didn't have the audio for.
Yeah.
And I had all these bootlegs, and I said, I have the audio. It's right here. You just have to match it together. And they did. It's amazing they did. But it's like, if I didn't have those, the sets wouldn't be out. And people always wonder, how come they don't do this? And it's like, they lost it. And it just seems weird that they would have lost it. But I guess they do, after exchanging so many hands.
I have all those sets, and I think I'm grateful to have them.
Yeah.
And I'm glad. I think they did a better job with those than they did with the RankinBass.
Yeah.
It really surprised me, and this really knocked me for a loop, because they did a Blu-ray for Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol that was way better than Rudolph and Frosty and Santa Claus is Coming to Town and everything.
Right.
And they got Daryl Van Sitters.
Yeah.
That's his name, right?
Yeah.
And put a little version of his book in there, and then they did some comparisons with the storyboard art and the animation, and they put it in a hardcover book and everything, and
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of that special. Don't get me wrong, I love it, but it's so much less popular than Rudolph and Frosty and Santa Claus is Coming to Town.
Right.
I'm thinking, why didn't they do those like this and get me involved and put a little book of my book in the Rudolph, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's
Right.
like, why in the hell did they do such a good job with Mr. Magoo and such a bad job with the others?
Well, I can't.
I have no idea.
I can only speak for the ones I worked on, which do have a little booklet with those. I worked on those and wrote them.
Yeah, I like those booklets.
The whole series with mine was Shout Factory. I was working with Shout Factory. They had the rights to everything, but and they were working with Classic Media. But they said, to put it mildly, they said Classic Media is a handful, and that was a polite way of putting it. And so they were basically depending on me to kind of make it a workable thing out of just all these unrelated elements and everything, and kind of make a booklet that kind of explained everything in a few pages, and it's like, fortunately I'd already written my book, so I could do that, and it worked. But they asked me to do a booklet. It wasn't the other way around. But I don't know the situation with all those RankinBass specials. I mean, it's at the time when I was dealing with Classic Media, originally they were like saying, yeah, we're doing all this merchandising on RankinBass stuff, Rudolph and Frosty and da-da-da-da-da. And I was actually getting more annoyed that they weren't merchandising the Harvey characters more.
Right.
Which is the same thing to this day. They still merchandise Rudolph and Frosty, even if it's crummy stuff sometimes, better than the Harvey stuff. And I don't get it. It's, and this is NBC Universal.
Well, you brought up a good point. I've heard good things about Shout Factory from a variety of people, and they're like, Shout Factory needs to put this stuff out.
Yeah.
They need to do complete box set of RankinBass and get you involved and this and that, and I think they're right.
That's probably the best way to do it, and especially if everything hasn't been on Blu-ray, that would be the selling point. You know, something new. In some way you could get at least all the, let's say, 64 to 74 stuff together.
Right.
I don't know if you can get it all together. I mean, Shout Factory works some sort of miracle sometimes. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with all the Peter Sellers Pink Panther films.
Yeah, I have all those.
Okay, but Shout Factory was able to get Return of the Pink Panther, which was always like the loose canon of the series because it was independently financed and everything, and it was always out on DVD on its own. But they finally got a Blu-ray set out and the DVD set that has all of them together as they should be. Because for the public at large, they just want to see Peter Sellers, Inspector Clouseau, Pink Panther. They don't care that this one's over here and this one's over here. So it'd be fun if you or somebody, but I assume you, could get all the Rudolph specials together on one set. I know they're two different companies, you know, and get all the Frosty ones together the proper way, not the Frosty Returns one. Ugh. You know, it's like, you know, Frosty the Snowman and Frosty's Winter Wonderland, that type of deal, you know, and I know they're two different companies, but it just bugs me. You have to buy these separate little things all the time, you know.
Yeah. I know they just did the Abbott and Costello Blu-ray set of all the movies together, and I think they did some extra special things for that.
So that might be the way you would have to approach Shout Factory, and say, look, here's the deal, and this is what's come out, and I'm the authority. I think it should come out like this, and they might go, and they're actually pretty good. Sometimes, like I will say on Shout Factory, sometimes they don't get the proper clearances, and it just bugs me. Like they did a Steve Martin TV special collection. A lot of stuff was left out due to music rights and things like that, and I just you know, but most of the time they're pretty good, you know, and it's like, I think the reason why, are you familiar with Rhino Records in the old days? Yeah, the people came from the old Rhino Records, you know, so before they sold out to Warner Brothers. So they care about older stuff, and they want to do it right and do the right packaging, so.
I got to work with Rhino Records when I co-produced the release of Santa Claus is Coming to Town and Frosty the Snowman, the MGM Records, which was part of Warner Music Group. And that particular CD went out of print and goes for like $85 to $100 now. Yeah, because it was done right.
I have it, fortunately. I didn't know it was trading for that much for now, but I snapped those things up in a hurry. Like I think also there was like a promotion that went through the post office or something like that. I have that one too. Did you work on that one?
Right. That one I didn't, but that was early on, before they knew like what was going on with all the history part of it. But you know, like another thing, I was involved with the Mad Monster Party CD release because it never came out, period.
Right.
And a few years back, there was a vinyl issue, and a lot of people were asking me about that at my panels and things, and for some reason, the company that did the vinyl didn't want good liner notes, so they just got some guy from England to say why he liked the movie. And then they didn't use any photos. They didn't ask me for photos or nothing, and they did it all art. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, this is terrible. and then the transfer is not good either. The CD was way better. So it's like, why would anybody want this? But people are telling me, oh, I bought the vinyl, and I'm like, the vinyl sucks, you know, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. So it's weird how these things get done.
Yeah.
And everybody has their own opinion, and everybody thinks they know better than you.
Yeah.
Like when you're talking about the merchandising, obviously a lot of television stuff and Harvey stuff, if done right, would sell.
Right.
There's cool characters, there's nice retro things they could do with them, but try to tell that to the people that own the characters, and it's like goes in one ear and out the other. They don't know what they're doing.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. And then a lot of times they'll remodel the characters and put up something that's barely recognizable, but they'll slap Rudolph's name on it or something. And then that flops, and they go, well, we tried, that was it. And it's like, well, that's why. You took all the charm out of it.
Well, in the case of the Blu-rays last year, when I knew how bad they were and how we're not going to do the right thing with them, I had to put a review up on Amazon to let the fans know. Mm-hmm. And I saw, the last time I saw it, it got like 100 or 200 likes or whatever. Mm-hmm. That will not sit well with sales if you're going to try to sneak out inferior versions and people know that I'm, the historian for RankinBass and I'm telling people not to buy them, that's going to hurt your sales,
right.
And they just should have done them right in the first place and avoided all these problems.
Right.
Now we have to wait another, 2 to 5 years for another company maybe to buy them and possibly do them right.
Right.
It's sad.
Well, I guess the next chance is probably 2024 or something, when it's the 60th anniversary of the thing or something. That's all I can think of, But
right, exactly.
Well, I mean, you are a good keeper of the flame, I will say that. And the version I have of your book here is the 15th anniversary, so you've done a 20th anniversary version, right? Right.
We added about another 120 pages.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, the reason we do that is we want, in this case, I had one guy who was keeping folders on RankinBass at a newspaper. Mm-hmm. And he was like, I have these folders and I don't know what to do with them. I want to give them to you, So he sent me everything, and there was stuff in there I didn't have. Like there was a color fold-out folder from Pinocchio's Christmas that, the channel that aired it originally in RankinBass put together, and it had color stills that I didn't have, so I put that in the book. It's like I'm always finding stuff that I wished I would have had in the 90s when I did the first version,
right?
That I add in. So, that's why we do it.
Yeah. Well, it also gives fans like me a reason to buy it again, I suppose. If it's if you just had the one book from the 90s and never updated, everybody will say, well, that's out of date, or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like the book is on steroids now.
So how many pages is it? Like this one here, it seems like it's about 200, 300 pages. So how much is it, like close to 500?
Four something,
oh, wow.
I think. And then last year, this was kind of funny. With the Santa Claus is Coming to Town and the Daydreamer book, we were only looking for it to be about 200 pages.
Yeah.
Kind of like my Rudolph and Mad Monster Party book. But it ended up being 380 pages.
Yeah.
And Wes, who designs the books, he was like, we kind of knew that this stuff, and I'm like, well, let's just do it then, like this.
Yeah.
So we didn't cut anything out. We just kept going with it, and it just turned into this great big book. So it's almost as thick as the 20th anniversary book.
Wow.
Which I find funny. Because we didn't intend it to be, but that's just what happened. So if you have it's hard to cut things out.
Right.
If you have all this stuff, and I just enjoy doing it and looking at these things, and it's fun to put it all together.
Mm-hmm. Are there any plans to update like the existing Rudolph book, or is that pretty much exhausted? Or
well, I think we put some Rudolph material in the Arthur Rankin scrapbook.
Mm-hmm.
And in the 20th anniversary book. So if you're looking for updates on Rudolph, they're in my other books.
Okay.
In fact, even in the Santa Claus is Coming to Town book, there's some pictures and reference to Rudolph from the surviving figures that were in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Because I covered that in a chapter. We always do like Where Are They Now kind of chapter in each book.
Mm-hmm.
Because we find more stuff, and there'll be stuff like that in the Frosty book too. It's not focused completely on Frosty. It has, like I said, Mortimer Snurd. We found out that the King Kong puppet exists in Japan. A lot of the Willie McBean puppets survive. So all that's in the Frosty book.
So when you expand these, you don't take out anything, right? You just expanding?
No.
So, okay.
Yeah.
So if you missed out on the original version, other than just to be a collector that has everything, there really isn't a need to go back to the older version to get the newer version. It's probably best.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Although the original book of The Enchanted World of RankinBass in hardcover was so limited. Arthur Rankin in Classic Media bought most of them.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't even have that in hardback.
Yeah, so whenever I see one pop up, and I see like the price on it, I think, well, maybe it is worth that because it was so limited.
Yeah.
And for a while, that they were going for like $600 at used bookstores and things. So, I mean, it was crazy. But I think the updated versions, the 20th anniversary and the 15th anniversary, kind of take away from that because they're so much better book-wise than the original. There's really no reason to pay that kind of money for something that's out that's better now.
Right. Well, let's wrap this thing up. But what are your favorites? I mean, it's Christmas season. I assume most of them are Christmas specials. But what are your favorite RankinBass projects? It doesn't have to be Christmas related.
Well, I'm a big Christmas guy. We just got a snow here in Chicago, and I've already been getting into Christmas, watching shows and things. And I watched 'Twas the Night Before Christmas on Blu-ray the other night, and that's just magic, There's so many RankinBass shows that have a magical quality to them. I think Santa Claus is Coming to Town is one of those. I put the record on the other day, and when it gets to the part when Fred Astaire is saying, well, not everybody gets Christmas, and you hear, those characters, the bother, all cranky and everything. It's like, they really did know what Christmas was all about, and they really did know what putting heart and charm and these qualities that it makes me proud to be associated with the shows, because I mean, what's better than that? There isn't anything better than that. There's a magic quality to them, and that's hard to describe. you can write books and go into the breakdown of, the writer was Romeo Muller, and Maury Laws wrote the music, and this and that, and still you can't capture in writing that charm about them, that you have to watch them, you have to experience them, you have to have grown up with them to realize the magic that's involved, And I think it's sad that today's generation, I always think about this, with kids being on cell phones and not going out playing and all the things that we grew up with.
Right.
That they're missing, the Tennessee Tuxedo and his tails, and my good friend Bradley Bolke, who was Chumley, who we dedicate this Rudolph book in part to him.
Oh, that's good.
But, this stuff had a magic to it.
Yeah.
That today's society, today's kids growing up, they're not going to know about unless their parents show it to them somehow and get them involved with it.
Right.
It's not the same. And I can watch anything of Rankin Bass and recognize that quality. Rudolph is always going to be my favorite because the look of it and the songs and the characters, I think they really caught magic in a bottle with that one. And if you think about it, before Rudolph, before Frosty, before any of the Rankin Bass, which basically tell the story of the characters, Santa and Rudolph and Frosty, they didn't have any personality whatsoever in the comic books, in the songs, in the Fleischer version of Rudolph, in any of the early renditions of the famous Christmas characters. So when you see them now, you go into Menards or whatever, you identify their character immediately.
Right.
And it's all from Rankin Bass, Frosty the Snowman with his happy birthday and his lovable personality, that wasn't there prior to 1969, know?
Yeah.
So that's the thing I most like about the specials is that they brought personality to the characters too, and Santa Claus is Santa Claus now. We know him from all the Rankin Bass shows.
Well, if somebody is trying to get a hold of you or wants to order any of the books we talked about or any other things we didn't talk about, how would they reach you?
Well, we have miserbros.com. That's our main site for books and products. miserbros.com, like the heat miser, the snow miser. And then I keep a daily blog at Enchanted World of RankinBass.blogspot.com that I post all kinds of stuff related to my collection, which I was on Collector's Call with Lisa Welchel, and I hope to do some more television work. And I'm really into pop culture in general, not just Rankin Bass. I have a love for a lot of things, like all the things you wrote your books about.
Cool. Thank you.
That stuff means as much to me as Rankin Bass.
Yeah.
It really does. I mean, there's so many wonderful things from our generation that we had to choose from.
Right.
Nowadays, it's very limited. It's what everybody else is watching, but we had a lot to choose from. there were so many great animated shows and television shows during the 60s and the 70s, and I just love all that stuff. So you will see that on my blog.
Okay.
Like all the different things that I collect.
And this is airing the beginning of December. Are there any appearances you're making before the holidays or early next year in 2020?
Well, yeah, I have a lot of different things I do as far as appearances go. I'm going to be at Santa's Village a couple of times this year in East Dundee, Illinois. And in 2020, it's the anniversary. I don't know if it's the 30th anniversary or what it is of Chiller Theater in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
And I plan to be at both shows, the spring and the fall. And I'm going to try to get some of the puppets there, as I've done in the past. Some of the cool original Rankin-Bass puppets. Including Rudolph and Santa, and maybe Skinny Santa. So
Papa,
be cool. Yeah, that'll be a cool convention. And I always do well there. And I don't know. Hopefully, I'll be back at Dragon Con again. There were 86,000 people there.
Wow.
At the last one. So. I like to do the ones around the country that are focused on nostalgia or have the old celebrities that we like. A lot of them are dying now, so it's getting harder and harder to book them. I know the Hollywood show just did a signing with Coolio.
Yeah. Those are the old people now. Yeah.
It's like, what happened to, Barbara Eden or something, But, people like Adam West and all these people are passing away, and it's sad. But,
right. Inevitable, yeah.
Yeah.
But at least you... like you and I get their words on paper before they go, which I was always happiest about on the Total Television book, because all the owners are gone now, and
Yeah.
But I am talking. Go ahead.
Arthur Rankin and I developed a friendship. I felt like I was one of his sons as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to form bonds like that with people that are that instrumental. And I can say that I knew he wanted me to continue to do it.
Yeah.
And that's another reason why I do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's if we didn't do it, who's going to do it?
Exactly.
And who's going to do it right too?
Yeah.
Because we can see how it's done wrong.
Right. So, I appreciate the work you're doing, and I thank you for being on the podcast today. And
thanks for having me, and Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas to you too, and make your nose be bright and shiny, or whatever Rudolph says.
Will.
Right.
I sure will.
All right. Have a good day. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you for listening, and thank you again, Rick Goldschmidt, for being my special guest. Episode number 51 will be coming soon. If you would like to comment and or be a guest on this podcast, please drop me a line at funideas.mark@gmail.com. Become a Patreon of Mark Arnold and Fun Ideas Productions. If everyone listening just contributed $1 a month, that would be a tremendous help in continuing the production of my books and this podcast. Also, subscribe to my YouTube channel. The opening and closing music for the Fun Ideas podcast is provided courtesy of Andrew the Slow Poisoner Goldfarb and is used with permission. This has been the Fun Ideas podcast. This is Mark Arnold speaking. This episode is copyright 2019 Fun Ideas Productions. Thank you very much, and have a good night.
prescription pills in the pink electric church. The final flicker of your lewd jeweled boob to